colder in the mornings, though.
Getting a bit nippy, yeah.
Crisper.
So it says that we're live, so that's always a good thing. But I can't see it on my channel, so I can't see the chat. So if anybody is there waiting, if I can't see her, oh, here we go. So have we got anyone in the chat? We've got no one in the chat. It's just you and I, buddy.
Cool.
But that's okay. People always join us later. So how's your week been? Been busy? Last week?
Yeah. No, a deal went unconditional today, which was nail biting. What else? Just lots of little loose ends. I mean, it's not easy. I think it was either 300 or 3,000 agents in Auckland have walked away.
Really?
Different market up there, though.
Wow. Yeah. Well, that's right. So what was I? Yeah, and yeah. I want to apologise on air for last weekend, mate. For last week, I just I just came home and
zoned out.
Just did a couple of things, and then before I realised that, I woke up. It was 7:30, and that's when I sent you a text saying
tomorrow.
And sorry, and you said no, I can't do tomorrow. I'm busy. So yeah. So we've got Pork Chop, Stevie Ray Vaughan. Hey, thank you for joining us. So Carl's going to run through the last phase of Brian Jones's life.
Yeah, no, cool. I've got a correction to make too. Brian's, I guess the love of his life was obviously Anita Pallenberg, and that we know that Keith got with her. And then he was with a lady called Suki Poiter. I thought that was his last girlfriend until he died, but there was one last lady. I got Suki Poiter mixed up with a lady called from Sweden, Anna Hulin. Oh. Anna Hulin was the one that lived with him in his house for the last 5 months of his life, and she wrote a really good book in 1999. I think it was called My Love Affair with the Murdered Brian Jones. It came out in 1999.
Is that what that film is based on, her biography?
Yeah, it would have been big chunks of it out of that, for sure.
What was that movie called, on Brian Jones's life?
I'm not sure. It came out about 2005. They did a pretty good job.
Does anyone in the chat know what that movie?
I'll have a look.
Yeah, I liked it. I thought it was pretty good.
Stoned, the Brian Jones story.
That's it.
2005. So why that book's important is because there's been a lot of books I've read about Brian Jones where it's been secondhand information or interviews or, reporters following the newspaper, speculation, that sort of thing. But this was basically a personal account of his girlfriend who actually lived with him, who basically said, this is the guy out of the public eye that I got to know, And she said some very interesting things about Brian in his last 5 months, because we know the first part of our series was Brian, the band leader, the blues man, the purist. The second part is obviously the relegated to band member but virtuoso on multiple instruments and adding texture, color and layers to a lot of these great songs.
Yep.
Obviously this third part is, unfortunately, and I don't like the word the demise or the decline, but the last chapter. But I gave it some thought. Brian stopped being a guitar player. Not that he could not play the guitar, but Keith just got better and more confident. And you add that with songwriting partnership, anyone can feel, not demoted, but you know, anyone can feel, what's the word?
Put out,
Relegated, I guess, or
put out, pissed off.
Pissed off, yeah. So what Anna Wolin described was that Brian, in a way, he knew that the writing was on the wall. This is before he got fired. He knew that he wasn't a fully fledged member. He knew that his contributions weren't that great. So
I agree.
he was looking at other avenues.
I agree. I agree with that. I think he knew that his time was up.
Yeah, he was looking at other avenues. Part of him was actually excited because there was about to be closure, but another door opening. So he was, I think, jamming with Dave Mason. He'd heard CCR. He really liked what they were doing. He wanted a CCR style of band. Shit, get away.
Was there any conversation or discussion about him doing anything with Jimi Hendrix? Because they were tight.
You took the thoughts out of my mind when I got this annoying message on my phone.
Yep.
He'd been talking to Jimmy. Obviously, he wasn't in Jimmy's league, but you know, he'd obviously, they were friends, you know, and Jimmy obviously was the American connection. So Brian was pretty excited about, and your buddy Dave sent me a message or a link about some sessions that went down at Brian's house in Cotchford Farm with some guys.
Yes.
So there's probably some lost tapes somewhere. But what Anna Wolin mentioned, which is quite interesting, is because obviously Brian had hurt his hand under dubious circumstances.
Punching a wall?
That or Anita, one of the two, yeah. He started taking guitar lessons again. So he knew that he wasn't up to the mustard with his guitar, his chops.
Was it that bad that he had to take guitar? He was taking guitar lessons.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. He'd put the guitar down. Obviously, the slide became natural to him, but you can't play slide on every song. No. So he was getting guitar lessons. This is from memory from reading this book, which is an amazing book. He was really getting into the settled life at Cotchford Farm in the garden. He had to get a live-in housekeeper. He was trying really hard to control his drinking. He was going to church, reading the Bible. But often and at times he would go on these benders. So it was very sad, very sad. Part of him was really trying hard to break free, break away.
What's interesting though about the guitar, going back to the guitar lesson that you mentioned, what's really interesting about that is if you have a look at how many songs on Let It Bleed that feature the slide guitar, it's interesting. You know, there's at least 4 or 5 songs on there that've got slide guitars. So interesting. Yeah, but interesting though how Brian obviously could still continue to play slide with his hand being in whatever condition it was, so that he needed to go back and play, you know, chords or bar chords, but probably could have played a really prominent role in Let It Bleed had he continued being with the band playing slide, because there were a lot of slide songs.
I mean, he was featured in like 2 songs, Auto Harp, which you can hardly hear, and some kind of percussion. It was bizarre.
I'm just going to pull up Let It Bleed, and actually I can't, but there's a bloody shitload of songs on that album that feature the slide guitar. So he could have played a key role, more of a key role on that album.
Yeah. No, Let It Bleed was definitely.
So Let It Bleed. So Give Me Shelter, Love in Vain's got Country Honk, Live With Me, Let It Bleed, Slide, Midnight Rambler. You got the Silver's got Slide, Monkey Man. You can't. Yeah. So there's a hell of a lot of slide going on there.
It's almost like Keith
You froze.
and he basically imploded.
Sorry, mate, you froze there. What did you say about Keith?
It's almost like Keith absorbed so much of Brian initially, became stronger, and then Brian imploded. He basically was not set up for the fame and basically got weaker.
Is that your personal view?
No. Just something I thought of now. With Keith starting to play slide all of a sudden, either that or Brian. Keith thought he probably had to fill Brian's shoes.
Because I'm going to stand by Paul Trinker's argument, and he offers a bloody good argument, and let's make it very clear to anybody watching this show, I'm a Keith Richards nut, but I'm convinced of the argument that they made a conscious decision for whatever reason, and this probably should be a discussion. What were the reasons? But they made a conscious decision of just ostracizing, of pushing Brian out.
Well, yeah. Jagger Richards was a formidable songwriting team. It was.
Yeah, I don't know. I've never been in a band long enough to sack anybody, so I don't know how that dynamic works of how two individuals or a faction within a band gets to a point where they say, look, for whatever reason, we all know. I think you mentioned it last week, or sorry, the show previous, that they wanted to tour and they knew that they had a problem with Brian touring, didn't they?
Yeah.
So
the band was evolving. I mean, they could whatever. I was listening to 2000 Light Years from Home just before. What an amazing song! So whether it be Bob Dylan, Delta Blues, look at the 70s reggae and disco. Said, yeah, I can do that, and they had made #1 songs out of them. So yeah, so they knew that. I think Mick, in his shrewdness, from day one, was a calculated businessman too.
Hey, Dan.
And Brian's numbers weren't adding up.
Yeah. I'm of the view that they made a conscious decision somewhere along the line that they were going to get rid of Brian, and they probably didn't have the guts to get rid of him, to sack him straight out, but realized that they were a close enough unit, and we've all been in a family dynamic and a tight unit, and when you're on the short end of the stick, everyone knows what that feels like.
Yeah. They used Charlie Watts.
You keep stalling, buddy. You keep freezing on me.
Can you hear me now?
Yep. Hey, Jimmy T, is Carl freezing where you guys are? Or was it just my connection? So Jimmy T says hi, and so does Dan Halen. Dan the Man Halen.
Yep, I'm loaded internet-wise.
Cool. All right. So yeah. So I'm sorry to interrupt. So you're gonna have to text me the title of that book by his last girlfriend. I'll be interested to chase it up, buddy.
Yep, easy. I lost my train of thought, but it'll come back to me.
Sorry.
Oh, that's right. So Mick and Keith, obviously being the de facto leaders all of a sudden, the songwriting partnership, obviously, said, well, farm and give him the bad news. but meaning, you know. So the three of them drove down, didn't they?
Yeah, so do you want to recite that again, mate? Because I missed. So they drove down to sack him.
Well, they used Charlie as a pawn.
Yeah. Well, Charlie's always going to do that, isn't he?
Yeah. It was a little bit gutless on Mick and Keith's behalf, and then obviously, you know, the funeral. Who showed a lot of wounds there, a lot of wounds, a lot of history. That's why to this day they don't even mention them.
You know what I'm going to do, mate? I'm going to ask you to log out and then log back on again. I'll send you the link again because the guys are saying that you're freezing in the chat too. So maybe we'll just try that. Is that okay?
Off.
Yeah.
And no worries.
Yeah. Sorry about that, guys, but Carl's freezing as you guys are pointing out. So we'll just try a bit of mumbo jumbo. That always works. So if he's still on, Carl is still on somewhere.
Okay.
All right. So no, you're still
going back on.
Yeah. Did you go off?
Can you?
No, you're still just log out of Google Hangouts, mate, and I'll send you the invite again. Try that because you're freezing.
Yep.
Sorry, guys. Okay, we'll try this again. Bit of mumbo jumbo works because I can't hear him. I can't hear him finish his conversation. It happens, man. So what are you saying, Dan? It happens in bands. Is that what you're saying, Dan?
Can you see me?
No, I can hear you, buddy.
All right. You can see me now.
Yep.
Awesome. Let's shake this thing.
Yeah.
Here we are. So now
Cool.
I'm landscaped.
Cool. So let's see how that goes. So getting back to your point. So yeah, they made a point of using Charlie as the pawn, and he was always going to do what Mick and Keith told him to do.
Well, I mean, almost like a guilt trip, really. Like, hey, there's three of us, not the bad guys of the songwriting team, you know. You know, there's a third member here, kind of agreeing. So, yeah, it's hard. It's hard, you know. It's like a relationship, you know, where it's not working out, and you like that girl, but you know that she's not the one, you know. It's happened to me a couple of times, and it's almost like a death. Like my dad said one time, it's like a death, and then you just get over it eventually. It takes, you know, it hurts for a while. Maybe that's why primarily up to that point he'd been living pretty clean and, you know, read the Bible, playing the guitar, and then after that because what was that timeline between hearing that news and then him dying? Probably a month or 3 weeks or
short time.
So it's almost like half of him was probably thinking, well, I just need a break. Get my head together. Still love the guys, because they made sure that he released a press statement via Les Perrin, and Brian said in the paper, he said something like, oh, I love those guys. You know, there was a little bit of glossing over from the PR team from Rolling Stones, you know, to make sure Mick and Keith weren't the bad guys. No one was fired. He was leaving, you know. But I'm not stalling now, am I?
No, but it got to a point. It got to a point, you know, where we said earlier on, well, Brian knew that he was on his way out, so that's why he was planning things.
Yeah, I mean, Biggest Banquet, classic case. I mean, I would love to know who played on what song, and it's hard to find exactly because not even Keith knows. He can't even remember, but his contribution was declining. There's only so many songs Brian can play these odd instruments on. You know, fundamentally, the Rolling Stones. This is the point I want to make. I'll make it now. Brian's time from 62 to 69, the Rolling Stones were primarily an R&B band. But once they got more confident and louder and stronger, they became, when Mick Taylor joined, not only a rock and roll band, but the greatest rock and roll band in the world.
Absolutely.
1969 was an important time because we had the advent of PAs, Stax, Marshall Stax, bigger stadiums. The teeny boppers were now college graduates and young married couples. Brian's time was the R&B time, and Keith and Mick saw the future. You know, they knew that America was the helm of music and rock concerts and tours and magazines and media and culture. Alan Klein picked up on that, the Jew. So, you know, Brian basically didn't evolve into that rock sound, really. Mick Taylor came along. We'll talk about him in the next one show next week. Mick Taylor took them to another level. Brian was not a virtuoso lead player.
No.
A good guitar player, but, you know, you can't have two rhythm guitar players in a band. It works for a while. I mean, if you think about R&B music, James Brown, Solomon Burke, Wilson Pickett, Sam Cooke, there's no guitar solos. Not many.
No, but you check those guitar solos out on Get Your Ya-Ya's Out, you know, Love in Vain, you know, it's just fluid. The Sticky Fingers album, you know, Can't You Hear Me Knocking, it's fluid, Carl.
Yeah.
The lead playing is fluid, and I couldn't imagine Brian playing that.
You couldn't. You can't. It's impossible. See. Up to that point, and then I think Biggest Banquet basically solidified that. They went back to their roots. They flirted with R&B, flirted with psychedelia, but primarily up to that point, they were a rhythm and blues band. The interweaving. And then Mick came along, the interweaving stopped. Keith said, let's try something else. Mick Jagger really liked Mick Taylor because Mick Jagger was one that called up John Mayall and says, hey, listen, sorry, buddy, I've got your guy. And John Mayall was pretty good about it. You know, he's used to guys coming in his band and then going off to become heroes and legends and solo players.
Well, they were smart enough, weren't they, Mick and Keith? They were smart enough to see what these other English bands were doing in America. They were clever enough to work out what they needed, what the young kids wanted. You know, having a good guitar player was important. You know, we had a Fleetwood Mac show, didn't we? Late last year, where they had the two guitars playing, interweaving, and the Glimmer Twins knew that that's what they needed to be a successful act in America. They had to have that, you know, they probably worked that out while they were recording Biggest Banquet. And I'm going to tell you something. I watched the rock and roll shivers. You know, what is it? The Rock and Roll Circus?
Yeah, that's what it's called.
Okay, I was getting that mixed up with the Great Rock and Roll Swindle by the Sex Pistols. Again in the weekend, and it's a bittersweet watch because you're watching Keith and you're watching Mick Jagger, brilliant, just the way that Mick is performing, and then on the side there, you've got Brian Jones, Carl, and he's just doing nothing. It's horrible.
I think they even overdubbed his sound out all completely and put Keith's overdub on top because it doesn't match the footage he's playing.
You know,
really,
but Brian's just standing there. He's doing nothing. He's got his knees together.
He's bloated. He's a bit bloated.
He's just, yeah. I think that was about the time when they realised
we've got a liability.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a frustrating period because I always try and vote for the underdog or the pull for the lesser of.
Mate. It's what we do. We're Kiwis. That's what we do.
And the older I get, the more I realise that Brian, I was his biggest fan. He basically, I wouldn't say blew it. He just really, and I was actually reading about this through the Facebook. And this happened with Elvis. This happened with Kurt Cobain. A lot of these guys, a lot of this stems from their childhood. When Brian was born, he had a sister that came around about 2 years later. She died. And then they had another sister, and the parents alienated the sister and the brother. And so Brian never had much contact with his sister. So, and then it escalated when Brian became a bit of a rebel in the teens. And so Brian really had a really dysfunctional upbringing. Sure, he came from a nice town and a nice family, but a lot of that stuff never leaves you. Along with Janis Joplin, that 27 Club, you know. So a lot of that stuff from their childhood, yeah, it almost, it's not, I wouldn't say demons, but it impacts their psyche. So almost like a detachment issue.
Oh, yeah. Look, I'm not going to argue with you because, you know, we're all human beings and psychology plays a big part in who we are and where we go. But you know, let's bring it back to something that's a little bit more modern in the band at that time. You know, Keith pinching his girlfriend too. That must have had a huge effect on him.
Massive, huge.
Massive. Yeah. You know. I'm sure we've spoken about this in other shows, but you know, how can you function? You know, because he loved her.
Well, when I mentioned that word detachment, I liked your point.
Hey, JJ.
When they all went to that famous trip in the back of the Bentley to Tangier, Morocco, and then, you know, Anita was flirting with Keith, and Keith was like, "Oh, I'm weak, but I can't control myself. Why not?" And then Brian went back to the motel, and there was a telegram with the receptionist saying, hey bud, we've already left. Catch the next taxi or flight out of here. You're on your own. And not only would that have hurt, but that probably would have reminded him of his childhood. You know, you're on your own. So we're talking some deep psyche stuff here. And you're exactly right. I mean, here's Keith getting stronger. Biggest Banquet, Jumping Jack Flash, #1 song, Mick this, Keith that, Mick this, Keith that, Nita hanging out, Marianne Faithfull on the scene. But speaking of Marianne Faithfull, she was one of Brian's biggest fans, eh? She, even though she was, I think, with Brian first, then Keith, and she eventually just settled with Mick. When Brian died, she overdosed, didn't she?
Yes.
She was really hurt.
And she didn't say nice things about the rest of the Stones for not attending his funeral.
No.
You know, she's on record for basically, giving them grief. But Pork Chop in the chat mentioned something earlier. He said lead players want to be the showstoppers. I have to agree with him. That was it. That was the start of the rock and roll rock guitar god when Mick Taylor came into the band. That's when a lead guitarist was a category by itself.
Well, you had at that particular stage. I mean, Jimi Hendrix was solidified. He was on fire.
Yep.
Peter Green and Danny Cohen had done their second tour of America. Cream had just disbanded, but Blind Faith was, going. Jimmy Page that released their second album. Like you say, I mean, Tony Iommi was on the scene. Everything got heavier, faster.
You had Free coming along. You had Bad Company.
American bands, Grand Funk, Alvin Lee,
Allman Brothers,
Carlos Santana.
Yep.
Lead guitar was becoming, it was becoming the front of the band. It was really, I mean, whole bunch of them. It was clever young guys doing beautiful solos. I mean, you saw that Walsh, Joe Walsh was in New Zealand just recently. Has a very special part of New Zealand. He loves it. I mean, Eagles were starting to get going.
So the idea then that the Stones had made a decision about sacking Brian because of his perceived inability by the rest of the band to be the show-stopping lead guitarist makes sense, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, Keith's never claimed to be a lead guitarist. He did rhythm, love rhythm, played a Chuck Berry style solo, but that was his limitation. So in a strange kind of way, Brian helped Keith become a better player by trying to adventure out of that simple Chuck Berry pattern, which he can't help but still go back to this day. But, I mean, the Stones had big songs by then. There was, they had such a consistency about them. Every song was good on their albums. Mick Taylor was perfect.
So Dan's asking a question here, and I have to ask you this because I know that you love this band. He's saying, what do you think about Black Sabbath?
Me?
So yeah, you. So you can talk. You got 5 minutes to talk about Black Sabbath.
Oh, far out. I mean, I think Black Sabbath are the godfathers of heavy metal, even though they don't like to describe themselves as heavy metal. Just like Guns N' Roses, they love to think of themselves as just a rock and roll band, but they were just like, they were like this to Flower Power. They just wanted, they were sick and tired of the hippie movement. They just, like you mentioned before, Birmingham steel factories. Tony Iommi was a blues player. Geezer Butler loved Jack Bruce. Bill Ward loved Cream and loved jazz drummers. Ozzy was a John Lennon Beatles nut. It was these strange formation created this heavy sound. We love them.
Oh, absolutely, Dan. It's a rite of passage. Well, it was a rite of passage because I have no idea what young cats are listening to today. But in our town, if you liked rock and roll, Black Sabbath was certainly a band that you had to have written on your school bag or a tape deck. But I remember
my satisfaction. I can't care to hear for Paranoid ever again. They're so much better than that song Paranoid.
I kind of got spooked out on them. So here's my. I heard about the band before I heard them. And I would have been about 14 years old. And I remember this guy who incidentally was an American. Alex was his name. And he'd come over to New Zealand with his parents. And he'd been kicked out of a school and came to our school. And he knew a couple of cats that I was hanging out with. Anyway, he joined our circle and we found out that he was a music lover and he was listening to a lot of the bands we were. and he had back in the day, we used to have a square bag that you'd put your records in, and with a strap. And he had one of these bags with Black Sabbath on it, and he pulled out a record, and it was Black Sabbath. And they were talking about this, and all these other guys going, "Wow, you know, he's got this album." And one of the guys made a comment about it being, "Oh, it's devil's music" or something like that. And I thought, "Oh, wow, really?" And you know, that's when they said, "Oh, yeah." You know, half the songs are singing Generals get. You know, I can't remember what the songs were at the time. And I thought, "Oh, okay." And then a couple of weeks later, I went to my friend Garth's place, and he played the record. And the first thing that came into my mind when I heard that album, I heard blues. I thought it was even though it was heavy,
Yeah.
But I could hear some blues in there, and I thought, wow, this isn't that bad.
Well, Gibson through a Marshall, right?
Yeah. I loved it. I thought, wow.
I had a running joke with my uncle. Can you imagine the horror that a house mother would have with her apron and her woolen sweater and baking scones, and her son's in this room, and he's painted his room black, and he puts on that song Black Sabbath, and you hear the lyrics, "What is this?
Is this that stands before
me?"
you? Yeah.
Oh God, please
No.
no.
Yeah.
The horrors.
So Dan's agreeing. Crazy thing is, Sabbath is blues. Absolutely. And that was the first thing that I heard too when I listened to AC/DC. When I was listening to AC/DC, like a lot of you guys, probably about 12, ding, ding, ding. Yeah, it was blues.
Well, the other thing too is I think Jimi Hendrix started this. We've got to give him credit. And obviously Black Sabbath and Pantera took it to another level. Then death metal bands took another level. They dropped tuning, dropped D. In order to get a heavier sound, they wound the strings back heavier. And partly was because he had, 2 fingers half chopped off. So it made it easier for him to play. So a lot of situations created that sound. You know, the blues, the humbuckers, the Love of Cream, 2 chopped fingers, tough guys.
But it's no accident that they found that sound, because there's famous clips on the YouTube where they're talking to Tony about his sound, and he's articulating it very well, saying, "Look, I was working in a factory in Sheffield or Birmingham, where and he was hearing these steam presses, and that's what they were hearing, and this is something that they wanted to replicate in their music."
The same thing goes for Judas Priest. Same town, British Steel was one of their albums.
Yep.
Same thing. A lot of their sound came from the steel factories, and Animals, same thing. Hard-working towns, tough towns.
Yeah, and working class. They were working class guys too. They weren't.
Not many sunny. I mean, they would have never had a summer like we've had.
They weren't like the Rolling Stones, upper middle class or lower middle class, or they were working class boys.
I'll never forget my friend who's a big Black Sabbath nut. He was he's pretty wild. He's given up drinking. He's been sober for 6 months. I think he was 9 or 10, and he told his parents that he wanted to attend a Black Sabbath concert, and they were like, "I don't think so." Parents were scared of them. So,
of him?
No, parents were scared of the band, not him.
Yeah.
And then more scared that he would go and get eaten by a bat, or Ozzy would eat a bat. But
I love the band, and Dan, I was young enough to remember when Heaven and Hell came out with Ronnie James Dio. Yep. And jumping on our push bikes, and we pushed bike into town to get the CD, not the CD, sorry, it was the cassette tape, and push biking home and just putting that album in, and Wishing Well, and I just love that album. It's got a a part, a big part of
Yeah.
of my love. I love that album.
Did you like Ian Gillian's album with Black Sabbath, or
No,
he didn't
no,
quite fit? He didn't fit it.
no, no, no.
It was a strange.
I think I've listened to that album once in my life. So Pork Chop saying he saw Ozzy at a Texas Jam back when he shaved his head. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, he's gone through some strange phases, old Ozzy.
Yeah. He what's the word? He he suffered some kind of ailment of recent times.
Is it a stroke? A mini stroke?
Something. No, pneumonia.
Oh.
Something with his lungs. He had to cancel his European tour. He was devastated. But he's got some serious. I think he's got some pretty bad health problems. But yeah. No. It was 69 was an interesting year. The Black Sabbath came on, and stuff got heavier and more lead focused. And Brian, unfortunately, was not required. But I mean, hypothetically speaking, if he'd remained alive, what would have happened to him? Like Jimi Hendrix. I've wondered about Jimi Hendrix too. I don't think Jimi Hendrix's last album, he wasn't doing the big hits. He wanted to be a songwriter. Would he have just turned into a jazz musician in the end? Or some of these guys ain't cut out to be long-term musicians. They're like a lightning bolt. They're here and gone.
I think what we have to do is we have to look at Eric Clapton as the model, because a lot of people were saying the same thing too around the same time, that Clapton wasn't going to do it. Clapton wasn't going to make it. No one knew what was going to happen with him when he was going through his addiction, that heroin addiction. I think these guys may have gone out there and maybe done a jazz album or something, like you're saying, or a folk album, who knows? But I think they're clever enough and smart enough to know where the bread is buttered, and I think they just sort of carried on doing. Look at Jeff Beck. He's done some weird albums, but he's still doing Jeff Beck, isn't he? So
yeah,
I don't think they would have branched off and done something completely like opera or anything like that.
Yeah, there's three things. There's the initial hero. There's the guys that stay the course, and then there's the guys, if they do remain, do they sell out or they remain loyal to their craft? Yeah, it's a funny one. I think the Stones overall remain loyal to their craft. I don't think they ever sold out.
Well, I took your advice. The last show that we had, you mentioned about the Steel Wheels tour, the 90 tour, and so I downloaded that Live in Japan concert. You're right; they sound phenomenal. Mick is sounding. That's the last time where Mick is actually singing. From that tour onwards, Mick is just rapping.
Yeah, well, I just, like I said, I go on YouTube and you scroll down and you see a random video, click it on because you're curious. And it was Salt of the Earth with Axl Rose, and I was like, wow, this is unbelievable. And they had your friend Eric on there, and it was a good tour overall.
I just want to do a shout out to Wednesday Store, Dave. He's in the chat. So Dave, hopefully when he finishes moving, we'll jump on and join us for a chat. Dave he's just finished the Brian Jones tour.
Ah, cool.
Yeah, they did a Brian Jones tour, and I won't say
outside the headstone.
Yeah. So on the Facebook group, if you guys want to join our Facebook group, it's called All Things Sticky Fingers. If you want to search that, All Things Sticky Fingers Classic Stones, join that, and that will take you to a couple of other groups we've got. But there's a photo there of Dave standing outside, well, next to Brian's tombstone.
Yeah, yeah. No, really sad, really sad. I think that, and it's a bit of a, even to this day, you'd think the Stones would do on maybe one concert per tour. Brian, well, that's the good thing about the '89 tour. They did a couple of things to tribute Brian. Was it '89?
Yes.
Yeah. They did the 2000 Light Years and what's it called? The Pipes of Jan Juka or something.
And that's the last tour that Bill's playing bass. Cheapers. That guy's just phenomenal. He's amazing. What I like about that tour, you're right, because I didn't pay much attention to it.
Neither did I.
You can actually hear Keith making mistakes when he's playing songs. You can actually hear that he's a bit fast or he's a bit behind the beat.
Yeah. It's I mean, I remember having the what's it called, the renting the I think might have been the DVD or the VCR, and it wasn't too bad. I mean, was it the first time they used that there's 3 black girls, as well, which stayed on for quite a few tours. The back girls.
Yeah, and a black guy. Yeah. Very good. They and well, they needed it because that was the start of Mick rapping as opposed to singing.
True. Yeah. It's hard to watch them now because Keith's rhythm strum is getting weaker and weaker, and he's getting lazier and lazier, and yeah, it's just I can't do it. But yeah, I'm glad that they did a bit of a tribute on that '89 tour. But I mean, the legacy speaks for itself with Brian. I mean, it's pretty massive, to be honest. I mean, I saw that post that you put on the Rolling Stones 7 songs that Brian made magic, and how can we think of Paint It Black and Ruby Tuesday and a lot of that stuff with Little Red Rooster without his under my thumb, without his input. Yeah.
And you know what I like about that particular article is that there are good rock and roll journalists out there researching and reporting or recording or writing a version of the truth.
Yeah, and because through the 60s,
that was a recent article
with Brian adding those flavors and textures, because music was evolving quite rapidly with the social conditionings of the time, wars and drugs and freedom and protests. They couldn't afford to hire musicians to Brian basically saved them a lot of dough. So when we see them in the 70s and 80s, when on their eyes, let's get a horn section in for the Sticky Fingers. Let's get Billy Preston in for the keyboards. Let's get Chuck Leavell in. Let's get Sugar Blue for a harmonica thing from Miss You.
Well, they had to, didn't they? They had to. They had to have that big sound. It's yeah.
Prior to that, Brian was doing all that.
Yep.
A lot of it, not as big, but adding those flavors. So yeah, no, I unfortunately have to cut this short, but
no problem.
I'd like to wrap up the series by this is the 3rd series and the conclusion of Brian Jones's basically not only his contribution but his legacy to the greatest rock and roll band in the world. His immense contribution, his talent, his vision, a little bit like Bugsy Siegel with Las Vegas, gone but not forgotten. Yeah, and in
a funny kind of way, our show and people contributing to conversations in the chat, fans are making sure that we're trying to get across an interpretation and a version of history according to our understanding. So we've all got a role to play in it, and that's what I enjoy. You know, Dave's making a comment here that Brian buggered his hand hitting Anita. So yeah, he either hit Anita or the wall.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of famous shots of him with the bandaging, and he basically, yeah, there was unfortunately and you mentioned this, the Rock and Roll Circus, and this has happened to me with guitar playing. He lost interest, stopped practicing. One thing about Keith you got to admire, for all the thousands of photos we've seen of him, obviously with a cigarette in his mouth, but he always, every second photo, he's got a guitar in his hand.
Absolutely.
You know, you got to admire that. He was constantly honing his craft and playing and reinventing himself, where I think Brian might have got a bit fame drunk, you know?
Well, that's exactly what Keith says in his book, you know. It upset him, you know, because they weren't rehearsing at a given point, or he would ring up and say that he couldn't make this gig, and then he'd find out that, you know, Brian was at a party and he had people around him, and he was given an interpretation of the world according to Brian Jones. So Brian enjoyed that fame, that part of the fame, which is understandable. But you know, Keith is saying, well, hey, you know, we're a rock and roll band, you know, we need to be doing something, we need to be playing, you know.
It was almost like Mick and Keith were clever enough to keep their ego to a point in check, realizing a band is a business, and we've got competition out there, where Brian thought the party was never going to end.
They're kind of shy guys, aren't they? You look at some of those interviews with Keith, you know, when he makes a comment, he looks at the rest of the band and waiting for them to nod to agree, you know. Like he's waiting for them to agree with what he just said, you know.
It's almost, well, the heroin and the cigarettes and everything was a way, well, heroin especially was a way for him to hide. But because he became such a waster, and the public loved him for that, Captain Jack Sparrow, he just kind of rolled with that image, you know. But deep down, he was a bit of a mummy's boy. You know, he was quite, not sheltered, but he was very much, he wasn't the tough guy we all like to think he was. I mean, tough because he's lived through it all. But, I mean, Keith's basically two people. Mick and Keith are like Siamese twins. They're like joined at the hip, you know, they're quite strong.
It's interesting because there's a comment here that Dave's making. The tour guide mentioned that they may put up a statue in Cheltenham, but other than that, there is nothing. He's almost forgotten. So it'll be interesting to see who's going to put the statue up. Is it going to be the city council? Because, you know, you know, that's a famous son of that town or city.
You mentioned, I think you sent a post about the 20 greatest rock guitar players, and they never mentioned Peter Green. It's almost like, who's media friendly that we can nominate? Who's something that's, you know, that's, yeah. The media doesn't want you to think. They just want you to, I don't know. It drives me insane.
I think the great thing about lists, and I've softened up over time, because I used to hate lists. Yeah. And you know, I was a little bit dogmatic, and I would say, but I think the good thing about a list, though, is that it opens up an opportunity to have a discussion. And we've mentioned this before on many times on shows, that one of the negative things about social media is that if you make a comment, if you're asking a question, you know, there's always some smart ass that's going to make a smart comment or swear or put you down. And, you know, yeah, you sort of scratch your head and think, you know, why? You know, someone's asking a question, someone doesn't know. You know, we all come into this band, or we all come into this music at different levels of experience and expertise. The whole idea should be to offer a, you know, yes, have your opinion, you know, that's fine. Have an opinion, but don't kick anyone in the nuts for not knowing something or for disagreeing with you.
Yeah. Oh no, exactly. I mean, it's like you've seen it with the Sammy Hagar, David Lee Roth, the Jimi Hendrix, Eric Clapton, the Beatles versus Stones. The people, just. I was talking to a guy this morning. Actually, a friend of mine's brother came to an open home yesterday, and it was quite funny because we clicked straight away. And then I said to him today, I said, I feel like I know you. And he goes, yeah, I feel like I knew you too. We went to the same high school. He was 2 years older than my friend.
Wow.
And it's just like that Keith McDartford thing. It's like that Hamilton thing. That's like that connection.
Yep.
It doesn't matter where you are, your roots, there's a chemistry. But he turns out to be a big Megadeth fan. And what I like about the comments you read about Metallica and Megadeth, a smart person says, if it wasn't for Dave leaving Metallica, we'd have no Megadeth. Why can't we enjoy both? So that pretty much sums it up. Why argue when you can appreciate it all?
I love Megadeth. I love Dave. I love him.
He's going to drop off his autobiography, apparently. It's supposed to be really good.
Yeah, I love him. He's, yeah, man. Yeah, I love him. Yeah.
A survivor.
He's a survivor, man. Yeah, and there's no bullshit there. You read his book. Yeah.
Have you read his book?
Yeah. He's,
is it a good book? Because you're going to drop off.
Yeah. It's good. It's good.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
all right. I've got to make these annoying phone calls.
All right, man. Hey, I'll quickly sign off. Thanks, Pork Chop, for joining us. Appreciate the support, Dave. We'll keep in touch. Thanks for joining us. Jimmy T from Aussie, always good to see you. Dan the Man Halen, thank you for asking us about Carl's favourite, second, third, fourth favourite band. I don't know where Aussie and Black Sabbath sit, but it's in the top 5, I think, with Carl. Thanks for joining us, JJ. And we'll see you guys next. We'll be on next week. Thank you.
So this concludes the 3-part series on Brian, and next week we'll talk about Mick Taylor, his contribution to the band and what he did in that 5-6 years, 69 to 75, 74?
Yeah.
So 5 years.
Pick a couple of favourite Mick Jagger riffs or tunes that you love, and we'll talk about them. So just a couple.
And the following week, which will conclude the 3 different guitar players, we'll talk about Ron Wood.
Got to talk about Ronnie.
Yeah, his contribution from 76 onwards to this day. I mean, obviously, a lot of people have mixed feelings about him. A stand-in, a replacement, a sessions guy, whatever. But we'll talk about that later down the road.
That 81 tour made it for me with Ronnie. He's a legend. See you later, guys.
See ya.